Hello, everyone. Welcome to ICAHD's November 2023 update. I'm Jeff Halper, the director of the Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions. And, at the height of the Israeli assault on Gaza, the destruction of Gaza, something like 40% of the houses in Gaza have been destroyed already. There's so much to talk about that it's very hard within a 10 or 15-minute presentation like this to do that. And we really have to make decisions on what to focus on. ICAHD has certainly focused on what's happening in Gaza itself. We've written about it, but many other people are writing about it as well, of course. We put out a statement, a call against the genocide of the Palestinian people. And what we're saying is what's happening in Gaza is itself a war crime. The actual attack on Gaza might not rise to the level of genocide, which is the partial or destruction as a whole of a people. It certainly is a war crime. But if you put Gaza, which is one of the worst war crimes that Israel has committed, within the context of the last 76 years, from 1947, when actually the war against the Palestinians began, not just in 1948, but in 1947 until today and into the future, where Israel is trying to Judaize Palestine, where it's not only taking the land, but part of settler colonialism, which Zionism is that you have to erase the people. You have to get rid of them physically. Now, that doesn't mean necessarily killing them, although Israel has killed a significant part of the Palestinian people over the years. 10,000 people have died over the last month in Gaza alone. But it also means destruction in the sense that a people can't reproduce itself. So when you throw the Palestinians off their land, which Israel did in 1948, where about 80% of the Palestinians were driven off the land and became refugees and are still refugees today. And that happened again in 1967. And when you disperse a people, so that half the Palestinian people are dispersed all over the world, from the refugee camps in the Middle East to Middle Eastern countries to countries all over the world. And then when you take the other half of the Palestinians and you fragment them into little parts of the West Bank, into the Gaza concentration camp, which it really is, and you don't allow those people to be in touch with the people in Gaza, can't be in touch with the Palestinians that live in Israel, who are hardly in touch with Palestinians in the West Bank. Palestinians in Nablus can almost not be in contact with Palestinians in Hebron because it's very difficult and dangerous and sometimes impossible to travel. So in a sense, by displacing the Palestinians from their land and dispersing them and making it impossible for them to be in contact with each other, the different fragments of the Palestinian people, you're destroying their ability to reproduce themselves as a people, as a culture, so that both in a cultural sense and in a physical sense, Israel is responsible for genocide for over the last 76 years and counting, for the partial destruction of the Palestinian people. So that has to be said, and we put our analysis of what's happening in Gaza within that context. But I have to say, Gaza is very dramatic. It's on all our minds. I mean the level of violence, the destruction, the level of killing is something that's a crime that's happening in front of our eyes. But politically, and ICAHD is a political organization, we're always trying to step back from what's happening immediately, not to minimize it in any way, the significance, but to step back and to see what is the bigger political context? Why is this happening? And what does it mean? And if you do that, if you step back and you look at what Gaza is a part of, which is a part of Israel's 130-year, or Zionism's 130-year campaign to take over Palestine, to transform Palestine into the land of Israel, to replace the Palestinian people with Israeli Jews, to erase them, their presence from the country, their heritage, their history, their culture, and them from the country, in order that the country becomes Israel, which is genocide. But if you're looking at that process, actually what's happening in the West Bank today, which is not being covered very much, is much more significant in a political sense, in this bigger sense, than what's happening in Gaza. Israel doesn't want Gaza. It gave up Gaza years ago. There are too many Palestinians there. It's a small territory. It's run out of water. It has no strategic value for Israel. And Israel does not want to rule it. So if you think about the occupied territories or the land of Israel, that Israel wants to annex and take over and incorporate and become part of Israel, that's East Jerusalem and the West Bank. It does not include Gaza. So as dramatic as this attack on Gaza is, politically, in the bigger scheme of things, it doesn't really mean very much, because Israel anyway wants to disconnect from Gaza and give it to somebody else, the international community preferably. So what's happening in the West Bank is much more significant. And here what we're seeing is, under the guise of what's happening in Gaza, under the cover of what's happening, Israel is completing its ethnic cleansing of the West Bank. It's consolidating its apartheid regime. So in a way, Gaza is Armageddon for Israel. This is the final battle in the 130-year war to conquer, take over, and Judaize Palestine, not because of Gaza itself, but because that's the cover under which Israel is completing its ethnic cleansing of the West Bank. And let me show you with a map very quickly. And that is this. You see, here's the West Bank and East Jerusalem. I mean, many of you know this that have been here or they've studied this, but nevertheless, Israel has locked the Palestinians, about 3.5 million Palestinians in the West Bank, into these little brown areas of A and B. And those are the future Bantustans, or that's where the Palestinians have been concentrated, so that the Palestinian population today, which is half the population of the country today, the entire historic Palestine from the river to the sea, has been confined to 15% of the land. And so then what Israel wants to do is to incorporate about 70% of the West Bank, and then it's completed its process of creating the entire land of Israel as a Jewish state. You see? So what's happening today is this is more or less in place. This is what I've called the matrix of control. It's in place. The Palestinians are already confined to these little Bantustans, these little enclaves. Israel already has about 750,000 settlers in these massive settlement blocks. You see these pink areas, if you can look on the map, these pink areas form a kind of a grid, you see, in which these Palestinian Bantustans are then confined. And then what Israel has to do, and which is in the process of doing, is to clear out what's called Area C, the 62% of the West Bank that is controlled by Israel, and that's what's happening. So what we have today is the unleashing, under this Gaza attack, the unleashing of settlers. Settlers have actually been given weapons. Israel's ordered 24,000 assault weapons from the United States to give to settlers. and civilians. The settlers have been given uniforms, army uniforms, and together with the army have been driving the Palestinians by force, by violence, out of their villages. This is what's happening today. This is what's happening today, and this is the real story from a political sense that's more significant than Gaza. And that is that the entire area, basically between Nablus and Hebron and Ramallah and the entire Jordan Valley, has been cleared of Palestinians. So that in a sense, Israel is primed for the takeover of Palestine. And this is the point I want to get to. This is the basic point. What's going to happen the day after Gaza? And Biden has already announced, and Macron has seconded him with the EU, that right after the dust settles on Gaza, they're going to convene an international conference and impose a two-state solution. In other words, the international community is tired of this, and they want to get on to more pressing things. Why do they want to do normalization between Israel and the Arab world? Because they need an Arab world that will be pro-Western. They want to establish a Nato of the Middle East, of which a militarily superior Israel is a key. They want to counter Iran. They want to counter Chinese and Russian influences. Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states want to become world economic hubs. They can't allow the Palestinian issue, these pesky Palestinians, this minuscule little sidebar to what's happening in the world, to interfere with these bigger global politics. And so what's going to happen, and this is really where we have to sort of not disconnect from Gaza, but we have to look beyond Gaza and at the wider implications. This imposing of a two-state solution means basically that the international community has accepted this Israeli map, this Israeli structure of apartheid. Two-state solution does not mean a genuine Palestinian state. We have to keep our eyes on what's happening in Gaza. We have to continue to fight for a ceasefire. We have to continue to defend the rights of the people of Gaza. We have to be sure, in fact, that Gaza doesn't become the second Nakba, because Israel would love to get rid of the people of Gaza. From that point of view, Israel would incorporate Gaza into a greater Israel, into the land of Israel, if it could get rid of most of the Palestinian population and move its settlers in. And in Israel already, there are calls to reestablish settlements there. Now, it's not going to happen in that sense, because Egypt will not allow Israel to drive 1 or 2 million Palestinians out of Gaza and into Egypt. But it could happen under the guise of humanitarian aid. And we have to be aware that often humanitarian aid is in contradiction to political processes. So I could see a situation in which the United States will say, you know what, because there's no more housing in Gaza, there's no more economy, there's no infrastructure. How are the people going to live the day after the fighting ends? Well, I could see the United States saying, okay, you know what, we'll take 200,000, 300,000, 400,000 refugees and resettle them in the United States. Canada will say, you know what, we'll take another 200 or 300 refugees and resettle them in Canada. Different European countries will say, we'll take 10,000, we'll take 50,000, we'll take 100,000. In other words, under the guise of humanitarian aid to Palestinians and trying to relieve them of their suffering, there'll be another Nakba. There'll be another, in a sense, a refugee population created, again, seemingly to help the Palestinians, but in fact serving Israel's purpose of depopulating Gaza. And in that kind of a situation, where let's say 1 million Gazans are are settled in other countries as kind of a refugee population, then Israel will have thinned out the Palestinian population enough that it can move its settlers back in, it can reestablish control, and then that would become part of the greater Israel. So we'll see how that, but we have to really be on the on the watchtowers, in a sense, to be sure that this doesn't happen, this second Nakba in Gaza. Overall, then, again, we have to be really on guard against this Biden European initiative that's coming down to impose a two-state apartheid on the Palestinian people, ending forever their hopes of any liberation, any state, any self-determination of their own, in a sense, completing the process of genocide against the Palestinians. This is going to happen. And even though, we've talked at ICAHD about the one-state solution, one democratic state over the entire historic Palestine that we believe is the only just and workable political resolution of all of this, in between now, we have an intermediate battle to fight. And that is this initiative to impose a two-state apartheid on Israel and Palestine. So we have to keep our eyes on Gaza, but we can't lose the bigger focus of what's happening, because under the guise of what's happening today, under the guise of a two-state solution that will resolve the conflict so-called for the benefit of the Palestinians, we could really be seeing the final stages of this apartheid system being put into place. So those are my thoughts for November, and we'll talk again in December. Goodbye, all.